Welcome back to Takeaway Atlas. In the next 10-15 minutes, you'll get the key takeaways and a simple action plan, so you can apply the idea.
Welcome. Take a breath and just listen for a moment. We often talk about deep work as if it is a productivity hack or a clever trick for the ambitious. But those descriptions miss the core of what is happening inside your nervous system. Deep work is not a secret technique. It is the process of anti-forgetting. In your brain, a thought is not a lightning bolt. It is a slow, complex layering of your senses. It is a stack of sensory memories, sights, sounds, and textures, built up into an abstract space. When you sit down to do deep work, you are attempting to layer one specific idea with absolute clarity. You are trying to find one specific tool in the cluttered garage of your mind while discarding every other piece of information. The modern world, however, is essentially a casino designed to make sure you never find that tool. We hold these small devices that restrict our physical vision to a tiny rectangle, yet inside that space, they offer an infinite number of sensory experiences. The algorithms were borrowed from slot machines to keep you playing for novelty. Even when you are losing your time, your brain thinks it is winning because it has found something new. We have brought the distractions of the entire universe into the very device we use for work, meaning our cognitive space remains infinite and cluttered, even when our physical focus is narrow. You must understand that your ability to focus right now is not a switch you can just flip. It is driven by the inputs you received in the hours and even days before this moment. If your preceding hour was spent chasing the geyser of sensory input on social media, your brain is still working with that clutter. It is still trying to layer those thousands of irrelevant sensations while you are trying to focus on one task. This is why I believe focus is not a skill. It is an identity. It is the result of the boring breaks you choose to take. It is the decision to cultivate silence and limit sensory information before you ever sit down to work. When you lean into this discomfort, you are engaging the anterior mid-cingulate cortex. This is the physical seat of tenacity and willpower in your brain. It is a structure that grows when you do things you don't want to do. In a world of rampant distraction and fragility, this capacity to sustain focus has become your greatest competitive advantage. The bar for excellence has never been lower, which means your opportunity has never been. Consider this image to understand the difference between depth and the shallow world. Picture a ball bearing sitting on a vast, flat, metal surface. Shallow work is like flicking that ball across the table. It moves fast, hitting a notification here, an email there, and a random thought somewhere else. It is always moving, but it has no home. It is easily distracted by the slightest tilt of the table. Deep work is what happens when you stay in one place long enough for the metal to bend. Your intense focus acts like a weight, creating a deep valley, what scientists call an attractor state. As you stay with the task, the trench grows deeper. Eventually, the ball bearing drops into that valley, and it becomes physically hard to leave. You are no longer fighting to stay focused. The very shape of your mental landscape is now holding you there. Take your time. Let the trench form. The depth is where the color comes back into the world.
I've been sitting with that image you shared, the idea of the trench and the ball bearing. It's a beautiful way to think about focus, but it makes me wonder if we're being a bit too optimistic about how easy it is to find that gravity. Most people I talk to don't feel like they're in a trench. They feel like they're living on a perfectly flat, frictionless surface, where they're being pushed in 1,000 directions at once. They often tell me, I just can't focus, as if it's a character flaw or a missing piece of their DNA. But listening to you, I started to question if we've misdiagnosed the problem entirely. You mentioned that our ability to focus right now is actually driven by the inputs we received hours, or even days, before we even sat down to work. It makes me think that perhaps the reason people believe they cannot focus isn't a lack of willpower, but a failure of what you called sensory integration. If we spend our breaks chasing the geyser of sensory input on social media, we aren't actually resting. We're just asking our brains to layer thousands of irrelevant novel memories. We're cluttering the garage of the mind so much that when we finally sit down to work, we can't even see the workbench, let alone find the right tool. But I have to ask, with a bit of skepticism, is this idea of deep work actually realistic in 2026? You talk about no phone zones and converted art galleries, but for most people, the modern world is essentially a casino they can't afford to leave. Their jobs, their families, their very sense of belonging, it all lives inside that tiny rectangle that offers infinite cognitive space. When the algorithms are specifically designed to trick our brains into thinking we're winning while we're actually losing our time, is it even possible for the average person to scruff themselves and walk away? I wonder if deep work is becoming a luxury of the elite, those who have the resources to build Faraday cages or hire people to filter their world for them. For everyone else, The gravity of the shallow world might just be too strong. And then there is the seductive nature of that shallow work. We've all felt it. That strange buzz of checking off a dozen tiny meaningless tasks or scrolling through content about content. It feels productive in the moment, doesn't it? Our brains get that hit of novelty, that feeling of winning. But you mentioned how this often leaves people feeling empty, like they're consuming empty calories. It's fascinating that you define learning as anti-forgetting, because if we're just moving from one novel item to the next without any repeated recall or self-testing, then we aren't actually building anything. We're just moving fast to stay in the same place. Why do you think we've become so addicted to the feeling of being busy while neglecting the actual depth that makes life feel colorful? It seems to me that what people most misunderstand about distraction is that they treat it like an external intruder, a fly buzzing in the room, rather than an internal state we've been cultivating all day. If thoughts are just the layering of senses in abstract space, then every time we partake in the infinite deluge of the internet, we are actively seeding our own future distractions. We think we're just taking a quick look, but we're actually shifting the very shape of our mental landscape, making it flatter and harder for that ball bearing to ever find a home. I'm left reflecting on your advocacy for silence and boring breaks. In a world that demands we constantly project things out or pay attention to what everyone else is doing, choosing to be bored feels almost like an act of rebellion. If the bar for excellence is truly as low as you say because of this rampant fragility and constant noise, then maybe the most competitive advantage someone can have isn't a new app or a better schedule. Maybe it's just the tenacity to sit still long enough for the metal to bend. It's a quiet thought, but I suspect it's a very heavy one.
I hear the weight of your doubt. It is true that we live on a surface that feels increasingly frictionless, where every algorithm is designed to keep the ball bearing of your mind from ever finding a home. But I want you to consider that this difficulty is exactly why focus can no longer be a skill you practice. It must become who you are. When we talk about tenacity and willpower, we aren't just discussing abstract virtues. We are talking about the anterior mid-cingulate cortex. This is a physical structure in your brain that actually grows when you do things you do not want to do, when you lean into the discomfort of resisting a distraction. If you view focus as a tool, you will put it down when it becomes heavy. But when it is your identity, the weight is what builds you. You are not doing deep work. You are becoming the person who is capable of it. You ask why we fear the silence. I suspect it is because silence is the mirror that shows us the clutter in our own mental garage. We have brought an infinite number of sensory experiences into our pockets, and the brain has been tricked into winning through mere novelty. We are addicted to the geyser of sensory input because it prevents us from having to integrate our own thoughts. In the silence, the mud of our preceding hours, the emails, the headlines, the social drama, starts to settle. That settling is uncomfortable. It feels like thinking through mud because we are finally forced to confront the disorganized layering of our own senses. But as you move through that mud, something happens to your self-respect. It is the shift from reflexive behavior to top-down control. Every time you say no to a notification, your prefrontal cortex is suppressing the primal, hypothalamic urges that want to chase that hit of dopamine. This is where real peace comes from. Not from the absence of work, but from the mastery of your own internal state. Deep work is the process of reclaiming your agency from the casino of the modern world. You stop being a consumer of your own neurochemistry and start being its architect. Think of focus as a lighthouse lens. When we are distracted, the light of our consciousness is scattered. It is a dull, ambient glow that illuminates everything and nothing. It is shallow, hitting 1,000 different points on the water but never reaching the bottom. Meaning is like the treasure that sits on the seabed. To see it, you must take all of that scattered light and pull it into a single, intense beam. It is only when the light is narrowed that it gains the power to pierce the darkness and reach the depths where the real substance of life is hidden. The world will continue to be loud. The casino will never close its doors. But the depth you are looking for is not somewhere else. It is waiting in the space you create when you finally stop running from the silence. The most profound competitive advantage in an age of noise is a mind that has learned to be still.
Thanks for watching. If you want the next takeaway faster, hit subscribe. Now watch the next video on screen and drop a comment. Which book or podcast?